The sun was just beginning to rise over the quiet city when the auto repair shop doors rattled open. A sleek black luxury car rolled in, drawing curious glances from the small group of mechanics gathered in the garage. The engine made a low, stubborn cough, refusing to start. Behind the wheel was a man in an expensive suit, his tie slightly loose and a frown etched deep across his face. He stepped out quickly, his polished shoes clicking on the concrete floor. Everyone in the shop turned to look, their interest piqued by both the car and the man's obvious frustration. The mechanic who had been cleaning a set of wrenches paused and studied the car. She had seen many cars in her time, from old beaters to rare models. But there was something about this one that demanded respect. It was not just the make or model, but the way it seemed almost alive, stubborn, refusing to obey. She stepped forward, wiping her hands on a rag, her mind already analyzing the problem. She had grown up around engines, learning the language of pistons and valves as naturally as she breathed. Her years of hard work in the garage had earned her a reputation for skill and determination, but she was also used to being underestimated. The CEO approached her, his patience clearly fraying. He leaned on the car and looked directly at her. His tone was sharp, almost cutting. He told her that this engine must be fixed immediately. He wasn't asking, he was commanding. There was a tension in his words that made the air heavy. He added something that shocked her. He said that if the car wasn't running by the time he needed it, her marriage plans would be at risk. The words hung in the garage like a heavy cloud. She could feel the weight of both the challenge and the insult. For a moment, she just stared at him. The audacity of the demand was enough to make her blood boil. How could someone speak to her like that? But beneath her initial anger was a quiet determination. She had faced challenges before. She had faced people who doubted her because of her skin color, her gender, or the way she carried herself. Each time she had proven them wrong. She knew she could do it again. She moved closer to the car, her eyes scanning the engine with a calm focus that contrasted sharply with the CEO's tense energy. She opened the hood and started her work. Her hands were steady, her mind sharp. Every movement was precise, deliberate. She could feel the other mechanics watching her, sensing the intensity of the situation. The CEO, meanwhile, was pacing back and forth, muttering under his breath, growing increasingly impatient. He didn't understand engines the way she did, and he couldn't comprehend the patience required to listen to the engine's story, to understand its problems before rushing to a solution. She started diagnosing the engine, checking connections, listening to the hum of wires and valves. She could hear the subtle irregularities that would escape an untrained ear. She found the first issue, a fuel line that had begun to clog. It was a minor problem in some respects, but it could be the reason the car wouldn't start. She explained it to the CEO, who at first brushed her off as if her words weren't worth consideration. He was used to people agreeing with him, not calmly telling him the truth. Her voice remained steady as she outlined the problem and the steps she would take to fix it. She didn't raise her tone, didn't show fear, didn't react to his impatience. There was a quiet confidence in the way she spoke, a knowledge that her skills were sufficient to overcome this challenge. She started working, her hands moving quickly but carefully, replacing the clogged line and checking other potential issues. She had learned that rushing through a job could make small problems grow into bigger ones. She wasn't about to let the CEO's anger make her make mistakes. The CEO watched, a mixture of frustration and disbelief on his face. He had expected someone to panic under his pressure, to fumble or give up. That was what usually happened when people were faced with authority combined with threats. But she wasn't like that. She was calm, methodical, and completely in control of the situation. Each step she took, each adjustment she made, seemed to highlight his impatience and his lack of understanding. Her coworkers exchanged glances, silently acknowledging her skill and composure. They had seen her handle situations like this before, though never with stakes quite this high. They stayed out of the way, allowing her to work, knowing that any interference would only disrupt her flow. In a garage filled with noise, the sound of tools, engines, and chatter, she created a small bubble of focus where nothing else existed except her and the engine. Minutes turned into an hour, and the CEO's agitation grew. He began asking questions, snapping at small mistakes that weren't mistakes at all. He was frustrated by his lack of control, by the fact that someone he had underestimated could remain calm while he felt the need to dominate. She answered him with short, precise explanations, never losing her composure. Each response was a subtle assertion of her authority over the mechanical problem. Even as he tried to assert his own over her, she found more issues as she worked, each one explained with clarity and resolved with skill. The engine, stubborn and unyielding at first, began to respond to her touch. She could feel it waking up, returning to life, and her confidence grew. She worked not just with her hands, but with her mind, anticipating problems before they arose, understanding the way every part of the car interacted with the others. Her focus was absolute, and even the CEO had to start noticing the precision and skill in her work, though he refused to admit it aloud. At one point, he leaned over and tried to offer instructions, but she shook her head politely. She didn't dismiss him out of disrespect. She simply knew that following his directions would not fix the car. The engine required understanding, not orders, and she had that understanding in abundance. The CEO, realizing he couldn't control this situation through anger, took a step back, though his pride made it hard for him to admit it. As the morning stretched on, the garage became a stage for an unspoken battle, not of strength or status, but of skill, patience, and integrity. She continued to work, each step deliberate, each adjustment bringing the engine closer to life. The CEO, who had started the day with arrogance and impatience, began to see her in a new light. There was talent and determination here, a resilience that could not be forced or rushed. It was a lesson in humility, though he didn't yet fully realize it. The mechanic worked steadily, unshaken by the threats, by the anger, or by the high stakes. She had faced impossible situations before, and this was just another one. The more she worked, the more she felt a quiet pride. She wasn't just fixing a car. She was proving something far more important, that skill, patience, and integrity could overcome pressure and prejudice. The CEO's voice, though loud and demanding, could not shake her. She knew that she could handle this, and she knew that she deserved respect, not threats. By the time she paused to check her progress, the engine was starting to hum differently. It was no longer stubborn. It was responding to her touch, to her careful adjustments. She could feel the shift, the change, and she allowed herself a small, private moment of satisfaction. This was her element, her domain, and she was mastering it as she always had. The CEO, watching her, was beginning to realize that he had misjudged not only the situation but her abilities. The mechanic, however, remained focused, knowing the job was not done yet. The first part of this challenge was almost over, and she was ready for whatever came next. The morning light filtered through the garage windows, illuminating her concentration and skill. Outside, the city moved on, unaware of the quiet triumph taking place inside the small shop. She was determined to finish the job, to show that her abilities were real and undeniable. She could feel the tension in the air, but she did not let it distract her. Each movement was purposeful, each decision informed by experience. She knew the engine would respond, and she would ensure it did, no matter the pressure or the threats. And so, the day began in that small garage with an engine that refused to start, a CEO who had demanded the impossible, and a mechanic who refused to be intimidated. The first part of her journey was a test of patience, skill, and resilience. She had faced the challenge head-on, and though the day was just beginning, it was already clear that she was more than capable of meeting it. The story of the engine, the threat, and her unwavering determination had only just begun. The garage was filled with the hum of engines and the clatter of tools as the mechanic continued to work on the CEO's car. Her hands moved swiftly but carefully, each adjustment precise and confident. She had already found the first few issues and fixed them, but she knew that luxury engines like this one often hid more complicated problems beneath the surface. The car had a stubborn quality, and she could sense that the challenge was far from over. The CEO watched closely, his arms crossed, a mixture of skepticism and grudging respect in his eyes. He had expected her to falter under his pressure, but she had remained steady. She wasn't rushing, she wasn't panicking, and most importantly, she wasn't intimidated. Each time he opened his mouth to say something, she calmly responded, her voice carrying authority without arrogance. It irritated him at first, but slowly, he began to notice that her confidence was based on real knowledge. Not just bravado, her coworkers observed quietly, understanding that this was a moment where she needed space to work. They had seen her handle difficult cars before, but they knew that the presence of the CEO, combined with his demands, added a weight that could make any job harder. Yet she seemed untouched by it, her focus entirely on the engine. She was used to being underestimated, to having people doubt her abilities because of her gender or the color of her skin. In this garage, she had learned to let her skills speak louder than words. She opened the engine fully, carefully examining each component. She checked the wiring, the fuel system, and the transmission, listening to the subtle sounds that only a trained ear could detect. She could hear the faint irregularities that hinted at problems deeper inside the car. Her mind raced through the possibilities, recalling her experience and training. She had solved tricky engine problems before, but this one was different because it wasn't just about the car. It was about proving herself in the face of unreasonable pressure. The CEO shifted from foot to foot, trying to appear patient, but it was clear he was growing frustrated. He muttered complaints under his breath, tapping his fingers against the hood. He had never been challenged like this. Never had someone calmly take control of a situation that he thought he dominated. His ego struggled against the reality that she knew far more about this engine than he ever could. He had to admit silently that she was handling the car with expertise that demanded respect. She explained each step as she went, not because the CEO needed a lesson, but because she valued clarity and honesty. She didn't want to rush, didn't want to make mistakes, and certainly didn't want to compromise her work just to appease his impatience. She had learned that integrity in her work was far more important than satisfying someone's ego. She could sense that the CEO was beginning to recognize this, even if he wasn't ready to acknowledge it aloud. As she worked, she discovered a series of hidden problems. A worn-out timing belt, a faulty sensor, and a small leak in the cooling system. Each discovery required careful handling and adjustment. She fixed each one meticulously, checking and double-checking her work. The CEO watched, a mix of surprise and awe crossing his face. He had assumed she would struggle with even the smallest problem, but she was navigating a complex engine like a seasoned professional. Her hands were steady, her mind sharp, and her focus unbreakable. She could feel the weight of the CEO's expectations, but she refused to let it affect her. She knew that fear or anger would only lead to mistakes. Instead, she relied on her experience and intuition, trusting her training and instincts. The more she worked, the more confident she became. She felt the engine starting to respond to her touch. A small hum here, a slight vibration there, signaling that it was waking up from its stubborn silence. The CEO, noticing the changes, stepped closer. He asked a question about the timing belt, genuinely curious, and for a moment she felt a flicker of surprise. His tone was softer than before, less demanding, almost respectful. She answered clearly, explaining the role of the belt and the risks if it failed. Her explanation was simple and precise, showing that she was not only fixing the car but also educating him in the process. This shift in their interaction surprised both of them. She had expected resistance, but now she saw the beginning of understanding. Hours passed and the garage's energy changed. What had started as tension and frustration now carried a sense of cautious respect. The CEO began to appreciate the skill and patience required for her work. He noticed the precision of her movements, the confidence in her choices, and the calmness with which she handled pressure. For the first time, he realized that his initial judgment had been wrong. He had assumed she would panic or fail, but she was proving that talent and determination could overcome even the harshest demands. Her co-workers, meanwhile, remained quietly supportive. They knew her well enough to trust her judgment completely. They could see that she was in her element, handling a challenging engine with a mastery that left no room for doubt. They offered small gestures of encouragement, a tool passed at just the right moment, a nod of support, but otherwise allowed her the space she needed. She appreciated their silent backing, knowing that teamwork sometimes meant stepping back and letting someone shine. The mechanic paused for a moment to step back and assess her progress. She wiped her hands on a rag and listened to the engine, its hum now smoother, more responsive. She could feel the subtle changes in its behavior, each one a sign that her work was paying off. Her heart swelled with quiet pride. This was more than just a job. It was a demonstration of skill, resilience, and the ability to remain composed under pressure. She knew she was showing the CEO, and perhaps even herself, just how capable she truly was. The CEO, standing a few feet away, cleared his throat. His tone had changed since the morning. He no longer demanded, no longer threatened. Instead, he asked questions, listened carefully, and even offered suggestions, though she gently guided him back to the correct approach when needed. The dynamic had shifted. He was beginning to respect her expertise, realizing that this was not a battle of wills, but a demonstration of genuine talent. She continued working, adjusting the engine, testing connections, and monitoring responses. Each step brought the car closer to life. She moved with confidence, knowing that her skills were enough to overcome the challenges before her. The CEO, observing her, started to feel a mix of admiration and humility. He had underestimated her, and he now understood the importance of respect and trust. His earlier arrogance had been replaced by a growing recognition of her abilities. By mid-afternoon, the engine was almost fully responsive. It hummed steadily, showing signs of life that it hadn't displayed since it arrived at the garage. The mechanic's focus never wavered. She knew the final steps were crucial, and she approached them with the same careful attention that had guided her throughout the day. The CEO, who had arrived with impatience and anger, was now witnessing a transformation, not just in the engine, but in his own understanding of skill, patience, and professionalism. The mechanic adjusted the final components, checked every connection one last time, and listened closely to the engine's steady purr. It was almost ready. She allowed herself a small smile, not out of arrogance, but out of satisfaction. The challenge had been immense, the pressure unfair, but she had handled it with the same quiet determination that had guided her through every obstacle in her life. She felt a sense of accomplishment that went beyond fixing a car. She had proven that skill, focus, and integrity could overcome pressure, bias, and unreasonable demands. The CEO, watching her, finally let out a low whistle. He didn't say much, but his expression showed that he was impressed. He had expected a confrontation, a failure, perhaps even an excuse. Instead, he had witnessed competence, calmness, and mastery. The tension in the garage had shifted. Where there had been threats and frustration, there was now respect and a hint of admiration. The mechanic, focused and determined, had changed not only the state of the engine but also the atmosphere in the garage. As the afternoon sun streamed through the windows, the garage felt transformed. The mechanic continued her work, ensuring that every detail was perfect. The CEO, who had arrived with demands and threats, now observed in quiet respect, recognizing the effort, knowledge, and patience required to complete such a complex task. The day was far from over, but the first steps toward resolution had been taken. The engine was responding, the tension was easing, and the mechanic's skill had begun to shine in a way that could not be ignored. This part of the story was about more than fixing a car. It was about resilience, focus, and proving oneself under pressure. It was about challenging assumptions, confronting bias, and showing that talent and integrity could speak louder than words or threats. The mechanic had faced a test not just of skill, but of character, and she had passed with quiet confidence. The CEO, for his part, was beginning to understand the value of patience, respect, and recognition. The journey was still unfolding, but the foundation had been laid, and both would feel its impact as the day continued. The afternoon sunlight cast long shadows across the garage floor as the mechanic continued her work on the car. She had already resolved several of the main problems, but luxury engines often hid subtle, complicated issues that required careful attention. She moved methodically, her hands steady, eyes focused, and mind alert. Every adjustment mattered. Every connection she checked could make or break the engine's performance. The CEO leaned against the wall, watching closely. His expression was no longer one of anger or impatience. He had begun to notice the quiet confidence in her movements, the way she seemed to communicate with the engine as if it were alive. His pride struggled with this realization, but he couldn't deny what he saw. She was skilled, precise, and in full control of the situation. He found himself observing her with something close to respect, though he would never admit it aloud just yet. She checked the wiring harness carefully, tracing each wire from its origin to its endpoint. There were subtle frays and weak connections that could cause intermittent failures. She replaced what needed replacing, tightened others, and ensured every component was functioning properly. Her coworker handed her a tool, and she nodded in thanks without breaking her concentration. The garage felt quiet except for the low hum of the other engines and the occasional click of a tool. She had created a space of focus where nothing else mattered but the car and her skill. The CEO, unable to contain himself, finally spoke, asking about a sensor that she had just adjusted. He was curious, genuinely, though his curiosity came from a mix of interest and surprise. She explained its function clearly and simply, showing him why the adjustment was necessary. She didn't condescend and she didn't make it overly technical. Her explanation was precise and understandable, and it seemed to further impress him. For the first time, he began to see her not just as a mechanic, but as an expert deserving of recognition. The engine responded to her adjustments, coughing once, then settling into a more consistent hum. She listened carefully, aware that luxury engines often gave subtle clues about deeper issues. Her ears were trained to detect changes in pitch, rhythm, and vibration. She could hear the faintest irregularities that would escape an untrained ear. Each sound told her a story, and she followed it patiently, unraveling the problems layer by layer. Hours passed, and the garage seemed to shrink around the two of them. It was no longer just a place of work. It had become a stage for a quiet battle of skill and patience. She remained calm under pressure, while the CEO, who had started the day demanding and threatening, began to feel a mix of awe and humility. He realized that he had misjudged her from the beginning. He had assumed she would falter, that she would panic under his demands, but she was proving him wrong at every step. She moved to the transmission, carefully inspecting the gears and fluid levels. A subtle problem there could prevent the car from starting properly or cause serious damage if ignored. She adjusted what was necessary, filled the fluids to the correct levels, and tested the gear mechanisms. Each step was deliberate, each movement informed by years of experience and knowledge. She felt the car responding positively, its engine gradually becoming more stable and alive. The CEO stepped closer, unable to resist observing her technique. He asked a question about the transmission, and she answered with patience, explaining not only what she was doing, but why. He listened, realizing that this was not arrogance on her part, but professionalism. He was learning something from someone he had initially underestimated. Her skill was undeniable, her dedication clear, and her confidence inspiring. Her coworkers watched silently, respecting the space she had created. They had seen her handle difficult situations before, but this was different. The stakes were higher and the pressure was immense. Yet she remained unshaken, her focus absolute. She had learned long ago that confidence and skill could overcome fear, prejudice, and unreasonable demands. Today was no different. She noticed a minor leak in the cooling system and addressed it immediately. Luxury engines could be sensitive to even the smallest imperfections, and she knew that ignoring it could lead to larger problems. She fixed the leak, checked all connections, and tested the system thoroughly. Each successful adjustment brought the engine closer to life, and she could feel a quiet satisfaction growing within her. The CEO, watching her, began to sense the depth of her expertise. His earlier arrogance had faded, replaced by a cautious respect. Time seemed to stretch in the garage. What had begun as a tense, high-pressure situation had evolved into a careful, measured process of problem-solving and skill demonstration. She worked tirelessly, never losing her focus or composure. The CEO, who had initially issued threats and demands, now found himself observing, learning, and gradually appreciating her talent. The dynamic between them had shifted entirely. She paused to take a step back and listen to the engine. Its hum was smoother, more consistent, and responsive to her adjustments. She smiled faintly, feeling a sense of achievement. She had overcome the first major hurdles and was now tackling the final challenges with calm determination. The CEO, standing nearby, noticed the change in both the engine and the atmosphere. He had witnessed a transformation, one that was both mechanical and personal. She was proving her expertise and, in doing so, challenging his assumptions and biases. The mechanic focused on the final steps, adjusting the fuel mixture and monitoring the timing. She could feel the engine responding to her touch, every component working in harmony. Her skill and patience had brought it back from the brink, and the result was almost within reach. She had faced immense pressure, unreasonable demands, and the weight of prejudice, yet she had remained steady and confident throughout. The CEO, who had begun the day with arrogance and impatience, was now confronted with his own assumptions and the reality of her ability. She made the last few adjustments, double-checked the wiring, and ensured that every part of the engine was functioning correctly. The car, once stubborn and uncooperative, now responded smoothly to her work. It was a testament to her knowledge, focus, and resilience. The CEO, watching this transformation, felt a mix of admiration and humility. He realized that he had been wrong to doubt her, wrong to threaten her, and wrong to assume she would fail under pressure. Her co-workers, Seeing the engine almost fully operational allowed themselves small smiles and nods of approval. They had witnessed her talent countless times before, but today it was on full display in a high-stakes situation. She had managed the challenge with grace and expertise, demonstrating that skill, patience, and integrity could overcome even the most unreasonable demands. The garage felt different now, a space where respect had been earned and assumptions challenged. The mechanic stepped back, wiping her hands on a rag, and listened to the engine one final time. Its hum was steady, responsive, and alive. She had done it. She had met the challenge head-on and succeeded, not just by fixing the car, but by proving her expertise and resilience. The CEO, who had arrived with threats and impatience, now watched with genuine respect. He had underestimated her, but she had shown him the true meaning of skill, patience, and professionalism. This part of the story was about more than just the engine. It was about resilience, determination, and facing challenges under pressure. The mechanic had not only fixed the car, but had also demonstrated the power of focus, experience, and confidence. The CEO, witnessing this, began to understand the importance of respect, humility, and recognition. The journey was far from over, but the foundation had been laid for the transformation that was unfolding, both mechanically and personally. The garage had grown quiet as the late afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows. The mechanic had been working steadily for hours, her hands and mind completely focused on the engine. The stubborn car, which had seemed impossible to fix when it arrived, was now responding to her adjustments. Each hum, each vibration was a sign that her skill and determination were making a difference. The CEO, standing nearby, had fallen silent. His earlier impatience and arrogance were replaced by a growing sense of respect, though he was not quite ready to acknowledge it fully. She checked every connection, every component, and every fluid level one last time. Luxury engines were precise, and even small mistakes could cause serious problems. Her eyes scanned the engine carefully, her hands moving with confidence and experience. She adjusted the fuel intake, checked the spark plugs, and monitored the timing. Each small step brought the engine closer to life, and she could feel the progress building. Her focus never wavered, even under the intense scrutiny of the CEO. The CEO watched her quietly, his arms crossed, noticing how methodical and calm she was. He had expected her to falter under pressure, to show signs of stress or fear, but she remained composed. Her professionalism and skill were undeniable, and he began to realize that his earlier threats and impatience had been completely misplaced. She was proving without words that talent and perseverance could overcome even the most unreasonable challenges. She worked on the transmission next, carefully checking each gear and fluid level. The car had been stubborn, refusing to start, but she knew that the transmission was a critical part of the problem. She adjusted the gears, ensured the fluids were correct, and tested the connections. The engine responded positively to her adjustments, its hum becoming steadier and more consistent. She could feel the engine waking up, and with each improvement her confidence grew. Her co-workers watched from a distance, knowing better than to interfere. They had seen her handle difficult situations before, but this was different. The stakes were high, and the CEO's presence added pressure, but she remained unshaken. She had learned long ago that focus, skill, and patience were far more important than rushing or yielding to fear. Today was no different, and her determination was clear in every movement she made. The CEO finally spoke, asking about a small adjustment she had just made. He sounded less demanding and more curious, as if he wanted to understand the process rather than control it. She explained the adjustment simply and clearly, showing him why it was necessary. Her tone was calm and confident, not condescending. He listened, realizing that she was teaching him something about precision, care, and expertise. It was a subtle shift in their interaction, but it carried a lot of weight. Respect was beginning to replace arrogance. She noticed a small leak in the cooling system and fixed it immediately. Luxury engines were sensitive, and even minor problems could cause bigger issues if ignored. She replaced the faulty component, tightened the connections, and tested the system thoroughly. Each step brought the engine closer to perfect operation. The CEO watched, a mixture of surprise and admiration in his eyes. He had underestimated her, but she was demonstrating not only skill but also resilience and professionalism. Hours passed, and the atmosphere in the garage shifted. What had begun as tension and confrontation was now a quiet collaboration of observation and adjustment. The mechanic remained focused while the CEO, who had arrived with threats and impatience, was beginning to appreciate her expertise. He saw the precision in her movements, the thought behind every adjustment, and the calm determination in her eyes. For the first time, he realized that his assumptions had been wrong. She made the final adjustments to the engine, checking every component one last time. The car, which had refused to start earlier in the day, now hummed steadily, responding to her care and skill. She smiled faintly, a mix of relief and satisfaction. She had faced immense pressure, unreasonable demands, and the weight of bias, yet she had remained focused and confident throughout. The CEO, watching the transformation, felt a mix of admiration and humility. He had underestimated her, and now he was witnessing the results of her determination. The mechanic started the engine fully, and it roared to life with a smooth, steady sound. The garage seemed to come alive with the vibration of the running engine. Her co-workers watched, impressed but not surprised, knowing that her skill had made this possible. The CEO, however, was taken aback. He had expected a simple fix, perhaps a struggle, but he had witnessed a transformation. The car, which had seemed impossible to repair, was now functioning perfectly thanks to her expertise. He approached her cautiously, his tone softer than before. He acknowledged the skill and patience she had shown throughout the day. For the first time, he apologized for his earlier behavior, recognizing that his threats and impatience had been unfair. The mechanic accepted the apology, her expression calm and professional. She had not worked for recognition, but she understood the importance of acknowledgement. Her focus had always been on the task and the results, not on the ego of others. The CEO, impressed by her performance, offered more than just words of apology. He recognized her talent publicly, praising her skill and dedication. He acknowledged that he had misjudged her, and offered opportunities that could benefit her career. The mechanic, though initially cautious, accepted the recognition. She had proven her abilities under pressure, and now the acknowledgement validated her hard work and expertise. The garage, once filled with tension, now carried an air of respect and admiration. Her co-workers nodded quietly, proud of what they had witnessed. They had seen her handle difficult engines before, but today was different. The stakes had been higher, the pressure more intense, and the scrutiny greater. Yet she had remained composed, skilled, and confident throughout. She had shown that talent, patience, and integrity could overcome pressure, bias, and unreasonable demands. The CEO, reflecting on the day's events, realized the importance of humility and recognition. He had arrived expecting control and dominance, but he had learned a lesson about respect and the power of skill. The mechanic had demonstrated not just technical expertise, but also the ability to remain calm under pressure, to handle challenges with grace, and to command respect through competence rather than confrontation. As the day drew to a close, the mechanic cleaned her tools, ensuring that everything was in order. The car, now running perfectly, stood as a testament to her skill and determination. The CEO, who had arrived with anger and impatience, had witnessed a remarkable transformation. He had seen talent, resilience, and professionalism in action, and he understood the value of respect and acknowledgement. The garage, once a place of tension and confrontation, now felt like a space of accomplishment and respect. The mechanic had faced an immense challenge and succeeded. She had shown that expertise, focus, and integrity could overcome bias, impatience, and pressure. The CEO, having witnessed this, had learned a valuable lesson about humility, respect, and the power of recognizing talent. The day had started with threats and tension, but ended with admiration, acknowledgement, and a sense of accomplishment that would leave a lasting impression on both of them. The mechanic stepped back, taking a deep breath, feeling a quiet sense of pride. She had proven her abilities, maintained her composure, and earned respect through her skill and determination. The CEO, observing the car and her work, nodded in acknowledgement, silently recognizing the talent and perseverance that had made this success possible. The story of the engine, the pressure, and the triumph had reached a turning point, setting the stage for a lasting impact on both their lives.